My name is Emily Matheson, and I'm 35 years old. I built my software consulting company from nothing, 10 years of sleepless nights, failed prototypes, and cold coffee. Now it's valued in the millions. People like to say I'm the kind of woman who has everything together. I wish that were true. Last week, I got back from a business trip ahead of schedule only to step right into the moment that shattered the life I thought I had. My flight had been canceled and rescheduled ahead of time. I didn't bother texting my boyfriend Brian to let him know. I wanted to surprise him. It was almost midnight when the cab pulled into our quiet street. His car was in the driveway. Lights off. Everything seemed normal. Until I noticed the second car parked near the curb. Not one I recognized. Something inside me went still. Not nervous, not afraid, just still, like a system shutting down before the crash. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The house was silent except for a faint hum from upstairs. The kind of sound you notice only when it shouldn't be there. I remember thinking, please let it be the TV. But it wasn't. Halfway up the stairs, I heard muffled laughter. Then something else, soft rhythmic sounds that made my stomach twist. My hand tightened around the railing. For a second, I considered walking away, pretending I hadn't heard anything. Then, logic cold, precise, familiar took over. I pulled out my phone, hit record, and climbed the last few steps. The bedroom door was closed. The sounds were unmistakable now. I knocked. Once. There was chaos inside. Whispers, a thud, then silence. The door cracked open and Brian stood there, shirtless, face pale as death. Behind him, a woman scrambled for her clothes, her lipstick smudged across the pillow I bought last month. Emily, he started, but his voice broke. I just looked at him, calm, detached. You're home early, he said weakly. I am, I replied. My tone sounded foreign, like someone else was speaking through me. Who's in our bed, Brian? He hesitated. The woman bolted from the room, heels clattering against the hardwood. A minute later, the front door slammed and her car tore away. Brian reached for me. Please, Em, it's not what it looks like. I gave a small laugh that didn't sound human. Really? Because it looks like you were sleeping with someone in my bed. It was one night, he said desperately. One stupid mistake. We had too much to drink, and it just happened. You can forgive one night, right? I met his eyes. My voice didn't rise, didn't shake. Perfect timing, actually. He blinked. What? I walked past him straight to the office at the end of the hall. He followed, still talking, still pleading. The safe sat quietly behind the bookshelf where I kept all my contracts, my company shares, and the one document I never thought I'd need. I spun the combination lock, retrieved a thin folder, and turned back to him. Remember this. His face drained of color. Emily, come on. Section 7, paragraph 3. I said, flipping through the pages. Infidelity clause. You cheat. You forfeit your share of the joint assets and owe me $500,000. Ring any bells? He took a shaky step forward. That's insane. It was one time. It doesn't mean anything. Then it shouldn't bother you that it's in writing, I said quietly. You signed it. You had your own lawyer. He tried to grab the papers. I pulled them back. Don't. Em, please, we can work this out. You don't want to throw everything away over what I cut him off. A lapse in judgment. A meaningless mistake. Or over the fact that you thought I'd never find out. He looked down silent. I stared at him for a long time. The man I'd shared my home, my trust, my mornings with. The man who once said he admired my discipline couldn't even look me in the eye. Pack a bag, I said. You're staying somewhere else tonight. You can't kick me out. This is my house too. No, Brian, I said, calm as glass. I bought this house before you moved in. It's in my name, and the contract makes that very clear. So yes, I can. He opened his mouth to argue, but I raised a hand. Don't make this worse. Go. For a few seconds, he just stood there breathing hard, the muscles in his jaw twitching. Then finally, he turned away. I listened as drawers opened, bags unzipped, zippers rasped shut. When he came back down, duffel bag in hand, I was sitting at the dining table with my laptop open, already emailing my lawyer. Emily, please, he said again, voice trembling. It was one night. I love you. You're overreacting. Overreacting, I repeated softly. That's an interesting word for what you did. He stepped closer. You're cold. You think this makes you strong, but it doesn't. You're just proving everyone right. You care more about control than love. I looked up at him, then really looked at him. For the first time in years, I didn't feel anything. No heartbreak, no rage, just clarity. I cared enough to protect myself, I said. He stared at me, searching for something, pity maybe. Forgiveness, but I had none left to give. He finally left around 3 a.m. The sound of the door closing was the loudest thing in the world. I sat there until sunrise scrolling through months of joint bank statements, hotel charges, Uber rides from unfamiliar addresses, small recurring transactions that didn't make sense. My throat went dry. One night, he'd said, I wasn't sure I believed that anymore. When the clock struck 8, I called my lawyer and left a message. It's Emily Matheson. I need an urgent meeting. I have proof Brian breached our agreement. I want to enforce the clause. I pressed send and leaned back in my chair, feeling the weight of the night settle around me like ash. For the first time since walking into that room, I allowed myself to feel something. Not anger, not sorrow, just the quiet, irreversible knowledge that love was over and the legal process had begun. When the morning light crept through the blinds, it painted the house in pale gold like nothing had happened. But everything had. Brian's toothbrush still stood beside mine. His jacket hung on the chair. The quiet mocked me. My phone buzzed, 7 missed calls, 5 texts. Please, Em, let me explain. You're making a huge mistake. I didn't mean to hurt you. I deleted every message without opening them. Then I poured myself coffee and sat at the table staring at the folder I'd left there overnight. The cohabitation contract, as my lawyer called it, had been my idea when Brian moved in 3 years ago. People thought I was heartless for suggesting one. You're not married, my sister had said. Why treat it like a business merger? But to me, everything that mattered needed structure, especially love. Back then, my company was already thriving. Investors were circling. The business had been valued at over $2 million. Brian, on the other hand, was still finding his footing freelance photographer, charming but inconsistent. I didn't mind. What I did mind was risk. I'd spent a decade building something that could crumble in a divorce or messy breakup. When we first talked about moving in together, I brought up the idea of a legal agreement. He'd laughed. Em, we're not signing a prenup just to live together. It's not a prenup, I'd corrected. It's clarity. He accused me of not trusting him. Maybe I didn't, not completely. Or maybe I just trusted myself more. Eventually, after days of tension, he gave in. My lawyer drafted it. His lawyer reviewed it. He signed every page, including the infamous clause my attorney suggested at the last minute. If either party engages in infidelity, the offending party forfeits all claims to shared assets and owes the other $500,000 in damages. Brian had laughed when he saw that part. $500,000. You think anyone would risk that? Apparently he would. Now, sitting in the same kitchen where we'd toasted that contract with champagne, I couldn't decide if I felt vindicated or just hollow. At 9 a.m., my lawyer, Karen Mitchell, called me back. Her tone was calm but firm, the way it always was when bad news needed structure. Emily, I got your message. You said you have proof. I do, I replied. Audio timestamps everything. Good. We'll meet at noon. Bring the file and any evidence of financial inconsistencies you've noticed. We'll make this airtight. I thanked her and hung up. For a while, I just sat there tracing the edge of my coffee mug. The silence wasn't peace. It was the sound of my world rearranging itself. By noon, I was in Karen's office. She skimmed through the audio recording expression unreadable, and then leaned back. This clause will hold, she said confidently. He signed with independent counsel. The agreement is clear and proportional. Cheating triggers the penalty. It's enforceable. I nodded, feeling both relief and a faint ache I couldn't name. Karen studied me. You're handling this remarkably well. I had a decade of business crises to prepare me for this, I said with a small, bitter smile. I know how to separate emotion from action. She tilted her head. That may help in court, but not at home. I didn't reply. She continued, I'll file a notice of breach and request mediation. That'll pressure him to settle quickly. Do it, I said. 2 days later, Brian's lawyer reached out. The email arrived late at night. My client would like to discuss a private settlement to avoid escalation. I read it twice, then shut my laptop. Avoid escalation. After what he'd done, that sounded like a joke. The next morning, Brian showed up at my office without warning. My assistant buzzed him in before I could stop her. He looked exhausted eyes, sunken hair, disheveled. Please, he began. We need to talk. No, you need to leave, I said. He glanced around the glass-walled meeting room. You're really going to drag this into court over one mistake. You didn't make one mistake, Brian. You made a choice. He stepped closer. You think this makes you righteous? You're punishing me for being human. Everyone screws up sometimes. Not everyone does it in someone else's bed, I said quietly. He flinched, jaw tightening. You'll regret this. You're destroying both of us. I folded my arms. No, Brian. I'm enforcing what you agreed to. He looked at me for a long moment, then something dark flickered in his eyes. Fine. But if you want a war, you'll get one. He stormed out. By evening, the messages began. His mother called first, voice trembling. Emily, please don't do this. Brian made a mistake. He loves you. You can't ruin his future over a lapse in judgment. I stared out my window at the city lights. Mrs. Walters, I didn't ruin anything. Your son did that himself. Then his sister texted me. You're cold-hearted. You never loved him. No wonder he looked elsewhere. I didn't respond. When the world starts calling you heartless, it's often because you've stopped bleeding for them. Still, part of me wished it hadn't come to this. I replayed our first months together, the late-night coffees, his laughter echoing through the apartment, how he'd called me the calm in his chaos. And I realized now I was never calm. I was simply waiting for the inevitable storm. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept circling back to the bank statements I'd found. Hotel receipts under his name, but with charges suspiciously aligned with weekends I'd been away for conferences. The clause would cover the $500,000. But what about the rest? What if this wasn't the first time? I grabbed my phone and typed a message to Karen. Can we hire someone to trace all his spending? I need to know everything. Her reply came within minutes. Already ahead of you. I'll connect you with a forensic accountant in the morning. I put my phone down and stared into the dark. The anger was gone now, replaced by something sharper curiosity. What if Brian had been living off my trust longer than I thought? If love was supposed to make you blind, then betrayal was the cure. When Karen called 2 days later, her tone was crisp, businesslike. Mediation's been scheduled for Friday. He's bringing counsel. Good, I said. Emily, she added gently. Prepare yourself. He's going to try emotional tactics. Stay factual. You have the law on your side, but he'll come for your heart first. I don't think he can reach it anymore, I said quietly. The mediation room was neutral beige, an odd attempt at warmth that only made it colder. A rectangular table divided us. On one side, me and Karen. On the other, Brian and a young lawyer who looked barely out of law school. Brian wouldn't meet my eyes. He looked smaller somehow, his confidence stripped away. The mediator opened. We're here to resolve the financial dispute between Ms. Matheson and Mr. Walters. Karen began, voice measured and sharp. The agreement was signed voluntarily with independent counsel for both parties. The infidelity clause was reviewed and acknowledged in writing. The breach is documented via evidence presented. Brian's lawyer jumped in. My client was emotionally coerced into signing. The penalty clause is excessive, punitive, and not enforceable under public policy. Karen didn't flinch. We have certified correspondence from your client's previous attorney confirming full understanding. We also have proof that Mr. Walters successfully negotiated other sections of the agreement, including asset-sharing terms, which directly refutes any claim of coercion. The young lawyer faltered, papers shaking slightly in his hand. Brian finally spoke. Emily, you can't be serious. $500,000. It was one mistake, one stupid night. I looked at him calm but detached. It wasn't one night, Brian. It was the night that revealed every other lie. He clenched his jaw. You're destroying my life over a clause. Who does that? Someone you shouldn't have betrayed, I replied. The mediator intervened. Let's remain professional. But professionalism didn't stop the truth from burning. Brian's lawyer leaned forward, voice pleading now. Look, this clause isn't meant to bankrupt someone. It's clearly punitive. The court won't enforce it. Karen slid a document across the table. Case law from 3 separate rulings, each upholding similar clauses between high-earning parties where both had representation. This will hold. Silence fell. Brian looked up at me, finally, his voice low. I can't believe you're doing this. You did this, I said. I'm just making sure it means something. After mediation failed, the case escalated. Karen filed for enforcement. Over the next few weeks, the legal grind consumed my days. Affidavits, statements, timestamps, all cataloged and notarized. But nights were harder. I'd lie awake in my apartment wondering how the man who once made me laugh until I cried could have turned into this stranger who'd weaponized pity. My phone vibrated constantly. Messages from unknown numbers. He's broken, Emily. You've proven your point. Let him go. Everyone's saying you trapped him with that contract. Money isn't worth a soul. I ignored them all, though one message, anonymous, written in shaky grammar, stood out. Check the months before January. There's more you don't know. I deleted it, but it echoed in my head. 2 weeks later, the hearing date arrived. Courtrooms have their own kind of silence, the kind that presses against your ribs. Brian sat across from me, looking polished again. His lawyer rehearsed. They argued the same points: coercion, emotional duress, disproportionate penalty. Then Karen rose. Her voice was calm thunder. Your Honor, both parties had independent legal counsel. The clause was reviewed, initialed, and acknowledged. Mr. Walters violated a term he fully understood. My client seeks enforcement, not revenge. The judge turned to Brian. Mr. Walters, did you read and sign this agreement? He hesitated. Yes. With counsel? Yes. Then I see no ambiguity. The gavel struck lightly. Motion to invalidate denied. Proceed with enforcement. Brian's shoulders slumped as the words hit. The sound of his lawyer's sigh was almost pitying. Court adjourned. As I stood to leave, Brian reached out. Emily, wait. I turned expression blank. He swallowed. You're really going to destroy me over this, over one night. I studied him. You destroyed yourself when you decided loyalty was optional. He blinked. I was drunk. I tilted my head. Then you should have stayed sober enough to remember the price tag. Outside the courthouse, the autumn air bit through my coat. Reporters weren't there. This wasn't a celebrity scandal, but the chill felt public anyway. Every whisper, every judgment from people who didn't know me, echoed louder than the city's noise. Karen walked beside me. You did well. You didn't let him bait you. I didn't feel baited, I said, just numb. She looked at me carefully. That numbness, it's armor. But don't live in it forever. I didn't answer. Instead, I looked down the courthouse steps where Brian stood arguing with his lawyer. The same man who once told me he admired my strength was now cursing it. As I got into the car, my phone buzzed. A new notification bank alert. A transfer for $280 at a hotel near the airport. Dated 2 months before the night I caught him. My name wasn't on the reservation, but the card used was our joint one. My pulse steadied, so the anonymous text had been right. Karen, I said, my voice calm as ever, I need you to recommend a forensic accountant. She turned to me, surprised. You think there's more? I don't think I said, scrolling through the growing list of receipts. I know there's a pattern. And for the first time since the betrayal, I felt something again. Not grief, not anger. Purpose. If he wanted to play games with my trust, I would end them with math. The accountant's name was Daniel Rhodes, a quiet man with sharp eyes and a voice like static, low, steady, unshakable. He met me in my office on a gray Tuesday morning. I'd already prepared a folder of joint bank statements, card transactions, and expense reports that didn't add up. Daniel flipped through the papers slowly, occasionally marking something with a small red tab. You were right to look into this, he said after 10 minutes. These charges aren't random. There's a pattern here. Same hotels, same time frames repeating every few weeks. I stared at the highlighted lines. The pattern looked like a heartbeat. Can you trace where the funds came from, I asked. He nodded. Yes. Most were paid from your shared account, which means half the funds were technically yours. My jaw tightened. So in addition to breaching the clause, he used my money to pay for it. Daniel looked up. That's called dissipation of assets. In cases like this, the court can order reimbursement. Do it, I said. I want every cent accounted for. He gave a small nod. I'll need a week. That week felt longer than any month of my life. Every night I sat by the window, scrolling through old photos, our vacations. His smile, the captions that now read like lies. My rock he'd written under a picture of us on the beach. I wondered if he'd texted another woman right after posting it. The media hadn't picked up the case, but word spread through mutual friends. I became the woman who bankrupted her boyfriend. A few reached out pretending to check in, only to slip in a judgment. You're really going through with it. Over one mistake, Emily. Come on. You've always been the logical one. This isn't logic, it's vengeance. They didn't understand. It wasn't vengeance, it was math. A transaction faith, spent trust, lost penalty, applied. Still, I could feel their whispers follow me everywhere. In the elevator, in meetings. Even my assistant started looking at me differently. I'd gone from admired to feared. A week later, Daniel returned with a report thicker than a novel. He placed it on my desk like evidence in a crime thriller. Here's what I found, he said. Over the past 2 years, Mr. Walters charged roughly $15,000 on hotels, restaurant bills, and gifts that correlate with extended stays while you were traveling for business. I flipped through the pages, each line a quiet betrayal. Luxury hotels I'd never stayed in. Jewelry stores I'd never visited. Daniel hesitated. There's more. Some of these charges overlap with cash withdrawals and transfers to the same account under a woman's name, Melissa Hart. Melissa. The name hit like a match to gasoline. I remembered seeing her once, an acquaintance from Brian's photography circle. Pretty ambitious, always hovering near him at events. I'd brushed it off as artistic chemistry. Now it was financial evidence. I leaned back, breathing slowly. You're certain? Positive? Receipts, timestamps, transfers, it's all here? He's been funding multiple affairs. Multiple. The word burned. I called Karen that afternoon. He didn't just cheat, I told her. He embezzled from our shared account to do it. Her tone sharpened instantly. That changes everything. We'll file an amended claim for dissipation of assets. That's a separate reimbursement on top of the clause. How much? Roughly $15,000. We can prove misuse of joint funds, so the court will likely grant it. Make it happen, I said. That evening, Brian's sister called. Her voice was shaking with fury. Emily, what are you doing? He's falling apart. He can't sleep, can't work. You're ruining his life. I closed my laptop. He should have thought of that before he used my money to fund his affairs. It was just physical. He didn't love them. I almost laughed. Then I guess he loved them enough to put them on my credit card. She went silent for a beat. Then her tone turned venomous. You're a monster. Everyone's saying it. You trap people with contracts, and when they slip, you destroy them. No wonder he cheated your ice. Better ice than ash, I said softly and hung up. By the next morning, social media had turned into a battlefield. Anonymous posts about toxic control freaks and financial abuse started circulating thinly veiled, but obviously about me. Brian's friends flooded the comments with sympathy for him. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Because while they were typing accusations, Karen was drafting our amended motion. She called me that night, filed and time-stamped. His lawyers already called twice, panicking. What did you tell him? That we'll see them in court. I exhaled slowly. Good. Karen hesitated before hanging up. Emily, you do understand that this is total annihilation for him, right? He'll lose everything. I didn't take anything he didn't hand me, I said. 2 days later, Brian showed up outside my building again, rain pouring around him. He looked desperate, drenched eyes red. My security guard called before letting him in. Just 5 minutes, he pleaded. When I finally stepped out to meet him in the lobby. Please, Emily, I can't breathe anymore. You've won okay. You've proven your point. Don't take everything. I'm begging you. I studied him through the glass wall, the city lights flickering behind him like static. For a second, I saw the man I once loved, the one who used to make me tea when I worked late, who kissed my forehead when I fell asleep at my desk. Then I remembered the receipts, the lies, the woman named Melissa Hart. I didn't win, I said quietly. I just stopped losing. He blinked, confused. You're not human anymore. Maybe not, I said, but at least I'm free. I turned and walked back to the elevator. He didn't follow. The next morning, Karen forwarded an email from his lawyer. My client wishes to negotiate settlement terms to avoid further litigation. Underneath a short message from Karen, they're scared, which means we're close to the end. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the city skyline. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel numb. I felt something darker, satisfaction. It wasn't victory I wanted, it was acknowledgement that my pain had weight, that my trust had value, that consequences were real. Let's finish this, I murmured. The morning of the hearing, the courthouse smelled faintly of coffee and rain. The air was sharp electric, like the universe was holding its breath. I sat beside Karen at the long wooden table, our files stacked in precise rows. Across from us, Brian looked hollow. The confidence that once radiated from him had dissolved into a quiet, desperate stillness. His lawyer adjusted his tie, whispering rapidly, but Brian wasn't listening. His eyes were locked on the table, his thumb tracing invisible circles against the polished wood. The judge entered. Everyone stood. My pulse stayed steady. Karen leaned toward me, voice low. Remember, Emily, you don't have to feel anything today. Just listen. I nodded. I hadn't felt anything in weeks. The proceeding began. Brian's lawyer went first. He talked about human mistakes, excessive penalties, and disproportionate consequences. He called the clause punitive and emotionally coercive. When he said emotionally coercive, I almost laughed. The only thing coerced in that relationship had been my forgiveness. Then Karen stood. Her words were clean, surgical. Your Honor, this is not a case of cruelty. It's a case of contract. Both parties had full legal counsel. Both signed willingly. Both understood the clause that now governs this outcome. Mr. Walters violated that clause repeatedly, using joint funds to sustain multiple affairs. The law is clear. She placed Daniel's forensic report on the table. The sound of the thick folder hitting the wood echoed through the room like a gavel. The judge flipped through the pages silently, his brow tightening. This shows multiple instances of financial misuse tied to romantic expenditures. Mr. Walters, do you dispute these findings? Brian hesitated. His lawyer whispered something, but he didn't respond. Finally, he said softly, No, Your Honor. Karen continued, voice firm, but never cruel. Given the evidence, we seek full enforcement of the infidelity penalty of $500,000 as per the contract, plus reimbursement of $15,000 in dissipated assets. The judge closed the file. I've reviewed the documentation, including counsel verification from both parties during signing. The clauses explicit, the violation clear, and the evidence overwhelming. He looked directly at Brian. Mr. Walters, this court does not punish emotion. It enforces agreements. You signed a document that defined the consequences of infidelity. You chose to breach it. Therefore, the contract stands. He turned toward me. Ms. Matheson, the court grants full enforcement of the infidelity clause and additional restitution. Total judgment, $515,000. The gavel struck once. Brian's lawyer sighed audibly. Brian just sat there, eyes unfocused, like the world had gone silent around him. For a moment, I almost pitied him, not for losing, but for never understanding what he lost long before today. Karen gathered the papers calmly. "It's done," she whispered. When the judge dismissed the session, Brian finally spoke. "Emily, please," he said, his voice cracking. "Can we talk? Not as enemies, just for 5 minutes." I stood smoothing my jacket. "No, Brian. We stopped being anything the moment you brought someone else into our bed." He flinched, but I didn't stop. "You spent 2 years lying to me, using my money to build your little fantasies. I don't hate you, but I don't owe you comfort either." He shook his head slowly. "You're not the woman I loved." "That's because the woman you loved still believed you," I said. "She doesn't exist anymore." Then I walked away. Outside, the world looked painfully ordinary people rushing to work, umbrellas bobbing like tiny shields against the drizzle. Karen handed me a folded document. "Final order. They'll start wage garnishment in 30 days unless he pays sooner." I took it without looking. "Thank you." "Emily," she said softly, "I know this feels like justice, but justice is never warm. Take care of yourself." I nodded. "I will." That night, my apartment was quiet again. The city lights spilled across the floor like broken glass. I poured a glass of wine, opened my laptop, and stared at the numbers on the screen, the official judgment. $515,000. I should have felt victorious. I didn't. Just finished. The truth was the fight had stopped being about money weeks ago. It was about meaning, about proving that my pain wasn't disposable, that I wasn't disposable. When the first payment notification came through a few weeks later, $2,500 transferred via wage garnishment, I just watched the number appear in my account. No smile, no satisfaction, just quiet acknowledgement. I opened a new investment account and transferred it there, labeled it Consequences Fund. Maybe someday I'd donate it to a shelter for women rebuilding their lives. Maybe I'd let it grow into something symbolic, proof that every betrayal could still yield something of value. Months passed. The house I once shared with Brian sold within weeks. I moved into a downtown loft, smaller, cleaner, quieter. I redecorated everything in white and gray, no remnants of the past. One evening, as the sun set behind the skyline, I stood on the balcony, the city humming below. For the first time in a long while, I breathed without feeling the weight of anyone else's shadow. Brian hadn't reached out again. His sister had gone silent too. Mutual friends stopped asking questions once the truth about the multiple affairs leaked. The gossip faded, replaced by a kind of respectful distance. I had become the woman who refused to break quietly. Karen called one night just to check in. "You know, she said most people would have folded under that kind of social pressure. You didn't. That's rare." "I wasn't brave," I said. "Just done." She laughed softly. "Sometimes that's the same thing." After we hung up, I walked to my window and looked out over the city, each light a story, each one flickering with secrets no one would ever know. I thought of the first night, the sound behind the closed door, the calm that took over my body, the way the air felt heavy but clear. That moment had rewritten everything I believed about love. Love, I realized, wasn't about trust anymore. It was about awareness, knowing what you'd do if trust broke. The world sees contracts as cold, but maybe they're just mirrors, showing who we truly are when love fades and consequence arrives. I closed the curtains and whispered to myself, justice isn't sweet. It's sterile, but it's clean. And for now, clean was enough. 6 months later, the world had finally gone quiet. The emails from lawyers had stopped. The gossip threads had gone stale. The war was over. But peace, I learned, isn't the absence of noise, it's the echo that follows when everything you fought for stops moving. I was living alone now in a small penthouse overlooking the river. The walls were white, the furniture minimal, the silence deliberate. Every inch of the space was designed to remind me of control, a life I'd rebuilt with clean lines and no clutter inside or out. Each month, like clockwork, the $2,500 transfer hit my account. The consequences fund grew steadily untouched, accumulating both interest and meaning. I never spent a cent. I didn't need the money. What I needed was the ritual, the reminder that balance existed, that the world, however cruel, still obeyed math. Some nights I'd pour a glass of wine and scroll through old emails between Brian and me. I wasn't looking for closure, I was dissecting memory, trying to find the exact moment affection turned into performance. There were clues everywhere in hindsight. The way he'd laughed when I insisted on the contract, the way he'd called it overkill, how he'd teased who cheats on Emily Matheson, she'd sue you for it. He was joking, I wasn't. One evening, as I worked late, Karen called unexpectedly. Her tone was casual, but there was warmth in it. I just wanted to tell you the judge finalized the garnishment terms. No appeals left. It's truly over now. Thank you, I said softly. You sound tired, she noted. Just reflective. Karen hesitated. Do you ever regret how far you took it? I stared out the window at the city lights shimmering like shards. I regret that it was necessary, not that I finished it. She was silent for a beat. Then, that's fair. After we hung up, I walked to the balcony. The night air carried that faint metallic tang right before rain. Somewhere below, someone laughed a bright, easy sound I couldn't remember making anymore. Freedom, I realized, was quieter than I expected. Not euphoric, not triumphant, just still. I leaned against the railing, thinking about how everyone told me I was cold, that I'd chosen money over love. They never understood that this wasn't about money at all. It was about weight, about proving that my pain wasn't a footnote in someone else's story. Brian had texted once more 2 months ago from a new number. I hadn't replied. Hope you're happy. You've destroyed my life. Maybe he believed that. Maybe he was right. But the truth was simpler. I hadn't destroyed him. I'd only stopped saving him. Some mornings I caught my reflection in the mirror and barely recognized her. The woman with steel in her eyes and calm in her voice. She didn't crave revenge anymore. She craved quiet mornings, predictable hours, and the peace of never needing to explain herself again. That I decided was the true reward. I went back to work soon after. My company thrived. The projects flowed. Investors admired my precision even more now. You're unshakable, one of them said during a meeting. I smiled faintly. Experience teaches discipline. They thought I meant business. I didn't. Then, one evening, while reviewing financial statements, I noticed something odd. The Consequences Fund, untouched since its creation, had grown by nearly $30,000 in interest. I stared at the number, thinking about what it represented. Not revenge, not punishment, just reality. A physical manifestation of the truth. I'd learned the hard way. Trust is expensive, and betrayal compounds interest. I closed the document, turned off the lights, and sat in the dim glow of the city for a long time. For years, I'd built everything to avoid chaos, contracts, clauses, boundaries. And yet chaos had still found me. Maybe that was inevitable. Maybe some storms are necessary to prove the strength of your walls. When I finally went to bed, I left the window open. Rain had started to fall, soft, rhythmic cleansing. I lay there listening not to the storm, but to the quiet between drops. Peace doesn't arrive with fireworks. It settles like dust when you stop trying to fix what's already broken. Before I drifted to sleep, I whispered something I hadn't said aloud in months. Actions have consequences, and so does silence. Because silence, I realized, was what saved me. Not the contract, not the money, not the law. Silence, the moment I stopped arguing with what I already knew, was where peace finally began.